What would you do if your HOA knocked on your door one day and told you that your backyard was no longer yours? That it now belonged to the community, and you had to share it with complete strangers? Ethan was halfway through savoring an ice-cold lemonade, basking in the satisfaction of his brand-new backyard oasis, when the unmistakable, rapid-fire knocking shattered his tranquility. He sighed. Only one person in the neighborhood knocked like they were executing a search warrant. Karen. The self-appointed dictator of the HOA. With a resigned groan, Ethan set his drink down and opened the door. He barely had time to register Karen's usual look of self-righteous fury before she shoved a clipboard toward his face. "We need to talk about the pool," she declared, her voice dripping with the kind of entitlement only a true HOA tyrant could muster. Ethan didn't react. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of his lemonade, savoring the moment. Karen hated being ignored. Finally, he exhaled. "What about it?" Karen huffed, stepping forward like she owned the property. "The HOA has decided that your pool should be accessible to the entire community," she announced, as if she were delivering a royal decree. "It raises property values, and frankly, it's unfair for you to keep such a luxury to yourself when it benefits all of us." Ethan blinked. Then blinked again. "You're joking." "I'm absolutely not joking." Karen flipped through her clipboard, pretending to search for a non-existent rule. Ethan could see her eyes darting, desperate to fabricate something official. He cut her off before she could even try. "Let me stop you right there. This is my private property. My pool. Built with my money. You and the HOA have zero say over it." Karen's face twisted, as if Ethan had just insulted her entire family tree. "That's where you're wrong," she snapped. "As HOA president, I have the authority to enforce community standards. Shared amenities contribute to the neighborhood's overall appeal." Ethan let out a short laugh. "This isn't an apartment complex. It's my backyard." Karen's lips thinned. "So you're refusing to cooperate?" "Oh, I'm beyond refusing. I'm telling you to turn around and go harass someone else." For a second, Ethan thought she might actually combust on the spot. Instead, she drew herself up, jabbing a manicured finger toward him. "This isn't over." Ethan smirked. "It was over the moment you knocked on my door." Karen stomped off, muttering about neighborhood unity. But Ethan wasn't worried. She'd lost. Or so he thought. The next morning, a printed letter was taped to his front door. Mandatory community pool access discussion at HOA meeting. Attendance required. Ethan groaned, crumpling the paper in his fist. He had planned to spend the evening lounging by his pristine, Karen-free pool. But now? Now he had to deal with whatever insanity she was about to pull next. Ethan had dealt with plenty of HOA nonsense before, but this was on another level. He considered ignoring the so-called mandatory meeting, but something told him that doing so would only make things worse. Karen wasn't the type to let things go. If anything, she was the kind of person who dug her heels in deeper the more resistance she met. So, instead of enjoying his peaceful, Karen-free pool, Ethan found himself walking into the stuffy, overly formal HOA meeting room, where a handful of homeowners had gathered. Some looked mildly interested, while others were clearly there just to watch the drama unfold. And then there was Karen. Seated at the head of the table like a self-proclaimed queen, she beamed as if she had already won. In front of her sat a neatly stacked pile of papers, color-coded tabs sticking out like battle markers, and a clipboard she gripped like a weapon. The second Ethan took his seat, Karen cleared her throat dramatically. "We are here today to discuss a pressing community issue." Her gaze flickered toward him as if she were announcing a criminal trial. "As you all know, a certain homeowner has installed an extravagant pool that unfairly excludes the rest of the neighborhood from its benefits." Ethan leaned back, arms crossed. "You mean my private pool? On my private property?" Karen ignored him. The HOA believes it would be in the best interest of the community to implement shared access. We could arrange scheduled swim times, perhaps a sign-up sheet, and, of course, a spare key to the gate for emergencies. Ethan let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Let me get this straight. You want me to give a bunch of people I don't even know access to my yard? You want them to come and go as they please? Use my water, my electricity, my furniture? He scoffed. How generous of me. A few homeowners shifted uncomfortably, while others tried, and failed, to suppress amused smirks. Karen's eye twitched. It wouldn't be coming and going as they please, she argued, clearly flustered. It would be a regulated schedule. Ethan stared at her, deadpan. You're insane. Karen took a deep breath, readying herself for a grand legal argument. This neighborhood is built on community values. Everyone contributes. You are setting a precedent of selfishness. Ethan glanced around the room. Is anyone actually supporting this? A couple of homeowners avoided eye contact. One man in the back coughed awkwardly. Karen, undeterred, straightened her shoulders and smiled, a thin, forced smile that barely concealed her frustration. The decision isn't yours to make alone. Ethan leaned forward. Yes, it is. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Karen's face. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly. But just as quickly as the hesitation appeared, it was gone. Karen pulled out a piece of paper and held it up. This, she announced smugly, is a petition. Signed by multiple homeowners who agree that community pool access is necessary for neighborhood unity. Ethan's stomach twisted. He wasn't entirely surprised Karen had tried something shady, but this? This was next-level corruption. He stood up, calmly walked over to her, and plucked the paper right out of her hands. His eyes scanned the list of signatures. Some names he recognized, some he didn't. And then, there it was. His own name. Signed in perfect, cursive handwriting. Ethan gritted his teeth. Really, Karen? She blinked, feigning innocence. What? Ethan held up the petition for everyone to see. My name is on this list. I never signed it. The room fell completely silent. Karen's face stiffened before she quickly recovered. Oh, that must be a clerical error. Perhaps someone signed on your behalf. Ethan cut her off. Oh, I'm sure. I wonder how many other names here are clerical errors. Murmurs spread through the room. A few homeowners leaned forward, scanning the list in suspicion. Ethan turned to a neighbor sitting near the back. Hey, Mark, did you sign this? Mark, an older man who had lived in the neighborhood for years, frowned. No. I never even saw that paper before today. Karen's grip on her clipboard tightened. Ethan smirked. Well, that's interesting, because you're listed right here. More murmurs. The unease in the room grew. Karen was unraveling. She snatched the petition back. This is irrelevant. The important thing is that the community supports this initiative. Ethan chuckled. Then let's put it to a vote. Karen froze. That was not the direction she had expected things to go. She swallowed hard before composing herself. Fine. She turned to the group, masking her panic with confidence. All in favor of community pool access, raise your hand. Silence. Karen coughed. I said, all in favor. Not a single hand went up. Her forced smile twitched. A bead of sweat formed at her temple. Karen cleared her throat again and tried to save face. All opposed? Nearly every hand in the room shot up. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, enjoying every second of Karen's slow-burning humiliation. Her face turned a deep shade of red. This wasn't over. She stood up so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "This isn't over." Ethan shrugged. "Seems over to me." Karen stormed out, clutching her clipboard so tightly it was a wonder it didn't snap in half. Ethan watched her go, fully aware that this was just the beginning. Sure enough, when he got home that night, there was another notice taped to his door. HOA violation, pool water too blue, immediate correction required. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. Karen was just getting started. Ethan barely had time to process the absurdity of his latest HOA violation before the next wave of Karen's pettiness hit like a freight train. The next morning, he was woken up by another round of aggressive knocking. Half asleep, he groaned, already knowing who it was before he even reached the door. But when he swung it open, he didn't find Karen, he found two uniformed police officers standing stiffly on his porch. One of them adjusted his belt and sighed like a man who already regretted being here. "Sir, we received a complaint from a neighbor about excessive noise coming from your property last night." Ethan blinked, then pinched the bridge of his nose. "Let me guess, loud music, shouting, general chaos." The officer checked his notepad. That would be correct. Ethan stepped aside and motioned toward his completely silent house. "Go ahead. Take a look. If you find anything other than a perfectly quiet pool deck and a few sleepy birds, I'll eat my own flip-flops." The officers exchanged knowing glances before one of them took a slow lap around the yard. After a minute, he returned, shaking his head. "Not a thing out of place." The first officer exhaled sharply, clearly holding back an eye roll. "We can't stop people from making complaints, but if they continue without reason, we can take action for filing false reports." Ethan smirked. "So you're saying if she keeps this up, I can get her in trouble?" The officer hesitated before nodding. "If it's harassment, yes." That was good to know. But as Ethan soon found out, Karen wasn't just playing the long game, she was playing dirty. An hour later, he stepped outside to check his mail and found yet another HOA violation notice pinned to his fence. Fence height exceeds HOA guidelines by 1.5 inches, immediate correction required. Ethan stared at the paper, then at his perfectly fine, long-standing fence, a fence that had been there for years without issue. He huffed out a laugh. Karen was grasping at straws now. But when he reached his mailbox and found a second letter, his amusement turned to disbelief. "Pool water too reflective, creates a hazard for passing cars." Ethan actually had to read that one twice to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. Did she expect him to make water less reflective? Was he supposed to sprinkle anti-glare dust into his pool? At this point, he was convinced Karen spent her nights brainstorming new ways to torment him. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. That evening, as he settled into his lounge chair with a drink, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on gravel. His security cameras were already on, so he pulled up the live feed on his phone. There she was. Karen. Lurking at the edge of his property. Holding up her phone like she was collecting evidence for a crime documentary. Ethan decided to have some fun. He switched on his automatic pool lights, flooding the backyard with an eerie blue glow. Then, using his outdoor speaker system, he activated the preset thunderstorm sound effect. The speakers rumbled with deep rolling thunder. Karen practically jumped out of her skin. Ethan watched as she took off running, tripping over her own flip-flops before disappearing into her house. He burst out laughing. But by the next morning, the joke was over. Because when Ethan stepped outside, he found his backyard gate locked with a completely different lock. And hanging on it was a brand new HOA sign. Community pool, please use HOA issued key for entry. Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned and marched toward his fence, ripping the sign down. Oh, she did not just do this. Pulling out his phone, he called the HOA office. I need to speak with someone about an unauthorized lock change on my property. The receptionist hesitated before saying, "Oh, that must be the new community pool access policy. President Karen personally approved the update yesterday." Ethan clenched his jaw. Of course she did. Without another word, he cut the lock off himself and installed security reinforcements. Then, he requested an HOA financial audit. What he found made his blood boil. Karen had used HOA funds to hire a locksmith and print official-looking signs, all to enforce her personal vendetta. When confronted, Karen denied everything. But when the financial report exposed her transactions, she tried to cover her tracks with falsified records. Even the HOA board was starting to turn on her now. And Ethan? He was just getting started. Ethan thought he had seen the worst of Karen's antics, but the woman had a special talent for crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. The morning after exposing her misuse of HOA funds, he woke up feeling victorious. The look on Karen's face when the board members started questioning her was priceless, and for once, Ethan thought she might actually back off. But he should have known better. When he stepped outside to grab his mail, he immediately noticed something was off. A sharp, acrid smell lingered in the air near his pool, strong enough to make his eyes sting. His gut told him something wasn't right. Walking over to the pool, he stared in disbelief. The water was cloudy, an unnatural shade of almost neon blue. A thick, chemical scent hung over it. Pulling up his security camera footage, Ethan's stomach dropped. There she was. Karen, under the cover of darkness, pouring an industrial-sized container of chlorine into his pool. Ethan gritted his teeth. This wasn't just petty revenge anymore, this was destruction of property. Before he could even process his next move, his eyes caught something else, a brand new HOA violation notice taped to his door. Pool deemed chemically unsafe, immediate shutdown required until HOA approves water quality. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. So this was her plan? Sabotage his pool just so she could slap him with a violation? He wasted no time. Calling the police, he reported the act of vandalism and showed them the footage. The responding officer watched the video in stunned silence before exhaling sharply. "This is serious," the officer muttered. "She could have hurt someone if anyone swam in that." Ethan nodded. "I want to press charges." The officer took down his statement and promised to open an investigation. Ethan knew Karen would be getting a visit soon. But before that could even happen, she escalated even further. That afternoon, a CPS officer showed up at his door. Ethan frowned as he answered, heart pounding slightly. "Can I help you?" The woman gave him an apologetic but firm smile. "We received an anonymous report about children being left unsupervised in an unsafe swimming environment." Ethan's jaw nearly hit the floor. "What?" The CPS officer glanced past him, eyes scanning the backyard. "Would you mind if we take a look around?" Ethan let out a slow breath, stepping aside. "Be my guest." The officer walked through the property, clearly expecting to see some kind of hazard. Instead, she found a pristine pool, a well-maintained yard, and absolutely zero children. After a few minutes, she turned back to him, looking almost embarrassed. "I assume you don't even have kids?" Ethan crossed his arms. "Nope." The officer sighed. "I had a feeling this was a false report. Do you have any idea who might have done this?" Ethan didn't even hesitate. "Yeah. I have a very good idea." He showed her the security footage of Karen trespassing the night before, dumping chemicals into his pool, and explained the entire situation with the HOA. The CPS officer rubbed her temples. "We take false reports very seriously. This could have wasted valuable resources that were needed elsewhere." Ethan could barely suppress his grin. "So what happens now?" "Now?" The officer pulled out a notepad. Now I file a report of my own. Karen had just made a critical mistake. Filing a fraudulent CPS report was a crime. If Ethan had kids, it could have turned into a full-blown investigation for no reason. Now, she was on the radar for something much worse than an HOA dispute. By the time the police returned later that day to inform Ethan that Karen had been officially warned for vandalizing his pool, the icing on the cake came from one of the officers. "Oh, and she's under investigation for making false claims to CPS. Might want to keep an eye on her. People like that tend to get desperate when backed into a corner." Ethan nodded, but he already knew one thing for sure. If Karen was desperate now, she was about to get even worse. Because people like her? They never go down without a final, reckless fight. Ethan knew Karen wasn't done. The way she stormed off after the CPS fiasco, practically vibrating with unspent rage, told him everything he needed to know. She had lost the last battle, but in her mind, the war was still going. He just didn't expect her next move to be so completely unhinged. Early the next morning, Ethan's security alarm blared through the house, jolting him awake. His phone vibrated aggressively with motion alerts from his cameras. When he pulled up the live feed, his stomach dropped. Karen was in his backyard. And she wasn't just lurking this time. She was trying to pry open the pool gate with a crowbar. Ethan shot out of bed so fast that his knee slammed against the nightstand, but he barely felt it. He sprinted outside, heart pounding with equal parts fury and disbelief. Karen didn't even flinch when she saw him. If anything, she looked smug. "You have lost all sense of reality," Ethan said, his voice sharp with anger. "Do you realize you're literally committing breaking and entering right now?" Karen scoffed, holding up a laminated piece of paper as if it were a legal shield. "I have the right," she declared. "The HOA bylaws clearly state that community amenities must remain accessible to all residents." Ethan actually laughed. A deep, bitter, disbelieving laugh. "Are you seriously standing in my backyard, trying to break into my pool, while quoting a rule that doesn't exist?" Karen nodded smugly. "You forced my hand." Ethan took a deep breath, resisting the urge to snatch the paper out of her hands and toss it into the pool. Instead, he pointed at the security camera. "You do realize you're being filmed, right? I don't even have to call the cops. They're going to love this." Karen hesitated. Her lips twitched, and for a second, Ethan thought she might actually realize the insanity of her actions. But then, in true Karen fashion, she doubled down. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and dialed 911. Ethan stared in utter disbelief as she put it on speaker. "Hello, 911, what's your emergency?" Karen's voice shifted into a theatrical whimper. "Yes, I am being attacked in my own neighborhood. I am standing near a public pool, and the homeowner is physically threatening me." Ethan blinked. "Public pool?" Karen held up a hand, shushing him like he was the crazy one. The dispatcher asked for details, and Karen launched into a completely fabricated sob story about how she was just trying to enforce HOA rules when a dangerous man became aggressive. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. This is going to be good. And it was. The sirens came fast. 3 patrol cars rolled up, lights flashing, and Ethan immediately recognized one of the officers from the last incident. The man stepped out of his car, took one look at Ethan, then at Karen, and let out a sigh so deep it looked like it drained his soul. "Ma'am," the officer started, rubbing his temples, "why are we here again?" Karen spun around dramatically. "I was attacked." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You look perfectly fine." Karen's eyes darted around wildly. "Because I escaped before he could do anything." Ethan gestured around them. "With what?" "My pool skimmer." The officer sighed and turned to Ethan. "Do you have footage of what actually happened?" Ethan grinned. Oh, you bet I do. He pulled up the security feed and hit play. The footage showed Karen creeping into his yard, attempting to pry open the pool gate, and then her entire fake 911 call, word for word. The second the video ended, the officer's face hardened. "Ma'am, you do realize that making a false emergency call is a criminal offense, right?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. But he... "Ma'am," the officer interrupted, "you trespassed onto private property, attempted to damage a locked gate, and filed a false police report. Do you know what that looks like to me?" Karen's eyes widened as realization finally dawned. "I was just trying to do what's right for the community." The officer wasn't buying it. "Turn around, ma'am." Karen gasped, looking around at the neighbors who had come out to watch the spectacle. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president." One of the other officers stepped forward, muttering, "Not anymore." Karen's face drained of color. "No. This is my neighborhood. You can't just..." She turned toward Ethan, her eyes wild with desperation. Tell them I was just trying to enforce the rules." Ethan smirked. "Oh, I'll tell them something all right." He turned to the officer. "I'd like to press charges." Karen screeched so loudly that dogs 3 blocks away probably started barking. Within seconds, her hands were cuffed behind her back and she was being led toward the patrol car. "I'll sue you," she shrieked at Ethan. "I'll sue all of you. This isn't over. You'll regret this." Ethan waved at her as they loaded her into the car. "Have fun explaining this to the judge, Karen." The second the doors shut, the entire neighborhood erupted in applause. People cheered, clapped, and high-fived Ethan. A few even thanked him for finally standing up to the HOA's reign of terror. Later that night, Ethan sat by his pool, enjoying the peaceful silence. No sirens. No complaints. No laminated rule sheets taped to his gate. Just the soothing sound of water gently rippling under the lights. His phone buzzed. A message from his neighbor popped up. Karen's husband just posted on Facebook. "Looks like they're moving out of the neighborhood." Ethan grinned, taking a long sip of his drink. The reign of terror was officially over. And best of all, his pool remained gloriously, entirely, and permanently Karen-free. Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.